I never thought I would tell this story. But after everything that has happened, I can no longer stay silent. I have witnessed something. A shocking truth that no one dares to speak about. A truth that will change the way you see the world, the way you understand people, and most importantly, the way you think about race and faith. I want you to imagine this. A Black woman, her heart still full of love and hope, suddenly leaves this world. But her story does not end there. As she steps into eternity, she encounters Christ himself. And what he tells her about white people, about this world, is something no one could have ever expected. I know you may be wondering, what was revealed? What does this have to do with me? Be patient. What I am about to share may shock you, may anger you, but it may also open a new door for your heart. Have you ever felt misunderstood, judged simply because of the color of your skin? Have you ever wondered if God sees the injustice in this world? If so, then this story is for you. Leave a comment right now. Do you believe that God would reveal something about race and justice? Join me as we step into this story together. Hello, my name is Jessica. I never imagined that February 12th, 2023 would be the day I died. One moment, I was driving home from my night shift as a caregiver, exhausted but ready to collapse into bed. The next, everything went black. No pain, no fear, just silence. And then suddenly I was outside my body, watching paramedics desperately working to revive me. That's when I saw her, my mother. She had passed away years ago, but there she was, standing just a few feet away, radiant, peaceful. That's when it hit me. I was dead. I wanted to scream, to tell them I was still here, but my voice didn't work. My body, my broken, lifeless body, lay motionless on the cold pavement. Yet I felt no sorrow, no panic, only clarity. And as I looked into my mother's eyes, a truth far greater than anything I had ever known washed over me. What happened next defied everything I thought I knew about life, about death, and about the world itself. I never imagined that death would feel like this. No pain, no fear, no struggle. Just peace. Deep, overwhelming peace. I had been in a car accident. One moment, I was watching the paramedics working on my lifeless body, and the next, I felt myself being pulled into a radiant light. It wasn't just light. It was alive. It wrapped around me, filled me with warmth. And in that moment, I knew. I was home. Then, I saw him. Jesus. His presence was so powerful, so full of love that I dropped to my knees without thinking. His eyes, I cannot describe them. They held eternity. They held truth. They held me. Every mistake, every fear, every doubt. And yet, I had never felt more loved in my entire existence. I expected judgment. I expected to be reminded of every failure. But instead, he reached out. Not with hands, but with love. It was as if his very presence was healing every broken part of me. Then, he spoke. Come, let me show you. Suddenly, I wasn't standing before him anymore. I was seeing the world, but not as I had known it. I saw the world from above, covered in a thick, dark mist. It wasn't physical, it was spiritual. A fog of deception, clouding minds, distorting reality. I saw people walking through their daily lives, oblivious to the unseen forces manipulating them. Then I saw who was behind it. There were powers, real, dark, intelligent forces, whispering into the hearts of men, shaping thoughts, fueling divisions, controlling nations. I saw news media pumping out fear, keeping people anxious and distracted. I saw governments passing laws in the name of safety that stripped away freedoms. I saw people turning against each other over race, politics, religion, never realizing they were being played like pieces on a chessboard. They do not see because they do not seek. Jesus' voice resonated inside me. I saw people so convinced they were fighting for truth, yet they were blind to the real enemy. The deception was so deep that even those who claimed to know God were being led astray. Churches were divided, People were worshiping their own opinions instead of seeking him. And then I saw the future. The world had changed. It was no longer free. I saw people walking through cities that looked eerily normal, but something was off. No one was talking. No one was questioning. There were no protests, no debates, just silence, compliance. Then I noticed something else. Their hands. People were making purchases, opening doors, and accessing services without cash, cards, or phones. They simply waved their hands. I looked closer. There was something under their skin. It was small, seamless, almost invisible. But it was there. A tiny implant connecting them to everything. They believe it will set them free, Jesus said sadly, but it will enslave them. I watched as people eagerly accepted it, believing it was for their safety, their convenience. They didn't realize it was a trap. Without it, they couldn't buy food. They couldn't travel. They couldn't work. And those who resisted? They were shut out, labeled as threats, treated as criminals, cast aside by a world that had traded truth for control. It has begun, Jesus told me. The foundation is already being laid. Watch. I saw governments uniting under the guise of global security. I saw technology advancing at a terrifying pace, making people more dependent, more tracked. I saw how fear was being used to push people into submission. First, they scare you. Then, they control you. I saw social media shaping opinions, feeding people only what the unseen powers wanted them to see. I saw people willingly surrendering their freedoms in exchange for safety. And I saw something even more chilling. They had no idea they were being enslaved. They laughed at those who warned them, called them crazy, conspiracy theorists. They couldn't see the prison being built around them, one brick at a time. And the worst part? It wasn't forced. People accepted it willingly. They wanted it. They think they are free, Jesus said, but they are in chains. What I saw of the world, the lies and manipulation of power, seemed to be just the tip of the iceberg. And just when I thought I had it all figured out, Jesus showed me a deeper conspiracy, a dark plan at work with ramifications I had never imagined. Jesus didn't mince words. The enemy is cunning, he said, his voice filled with sorrow. He has sown division where there should be unity, discord where there should be peace. I was still trying to process the enormity of what he was saying when he showed me the first vision. I saw the world, my world, riddled with division. It wasn't the kind of division I thought I had witnessed during my lifetime. This was much deeper. The walls between people weren't just physical or political. They were spiritual. There was a veil, a distortion, clouding people's perceptions, and it was centered around the idea of race. I watched, stunned, as the enemy manipulated narratives, twisting truths and planting seeds of hatred between people who were, in reality, not so different from one another. I saw how the powerful tool of identity was being used against humanity. People were being divided by something as arbitrary as the color of their skin. Jesus continued, his voice heavy with grief. The enemy has made you believe in lies. He has made you believe that you are different from one another, that you must fight, that your skin defines you, that your history holds you back. But that is not who you are. The first image he showed me was of the Black community. I saw Black men and women filled with pain, anger, and a sense of injustice. Their eyes reflected a deep sense of victimhood, a belief that they had been wronged and that to survive, they needed to hold on to that anger. I could feel the weight of the resentment, the way it ate at their souls, and it was as if their entire identity was tied to never letting go of that anger. I saw how the enemy had worked to keep them trapped in that cycle. Through history, through media, through culture, the narrative had been perpetuated. You are a victim. You have been wronged. You must fight for your rights. And in that fight, they had been told that their pain was the only thing that made them who they were. Jesus looked at me, and I could see the anguish in his eyes. They have been taught that their worth is defined by their suffering, but that is not the truth. He said softly, "The enemy has made them believe that they must hold on to their hurt, that they cannot forgive, that they must keep fighting in the name of past wrongs. But in doing so, they have been robbed of the freedom I came to offer them." I could see the walls of anger around them, walls built of bitterness, but behind them, I saw souls trapped, yearning for peace. They didn't know how to break free, because they had been told that their pain was their identity. Then, Jesus turned my gaze to the other side. I saw white people, some standing with pride, others kneeling in shame. But what struck me the most was how they had been led to believe they were perpetually guilty. The narrative they had been told was one of endless atonement, of perpetual shame for things they had never done. It was as though they were carrying a weight they could never set down, a guilt that was imposed upon them simply because of the color of their skin. I saw how the enemy had told them that they could never truly be innocent, never free from the shadow of past generations. They were convinced that they were inherently flawed, that they must constantly apologize for the mistakes of others long dead. And in doing so, they were also being trapped. Why must they carry this burden? I asked Jesus, the question heavy on my lips. Jesus sighed. Because the enemy knows that guilt is a powerful chain. If they can convince them that they must atone endlessly, they will never truly live in the freedom I offer. They will forever carry the weight of an unjust narrative. I saw so many white people bent under the pressure of this constant guilt, apologizing for things they never did, trying to prove they weren't like the others. They had become paralyzed by fear, afraid to speak, afraid to act, convinced that any move they made would make them complicit. It was a prison, a lie that had held them captive just as much as the anger had held the Black community. Then Jesus turned to me and whispered words that I will never forget. "There is no black or white, only my people." In that moment, the scales fell from my eyes. I understood the truth. There were no divisions in the eyes of God. The enemy had created the illusion of race. It was a tool for division, a distraction from the true battle, the battle for our souls. Jesus spoke again, his voice filled with authority. "I did not create you to be divided. I did not create you to be enemies. I created you to be one people. A people united under my love, my grace, and my truth." I felt his words pierce my heart, like a sword cutting through the lies I had been fed my entire life. We were not black and white. We were not victims and perpetrators. We were simply human beings, created by a loving God, meant to live in peace with one another. The divisions that had been sown into humanity, by history, by culture, by the enemy, were not real. They were distractions, weapons used to keep us divided, to keep us weak. And in that moment, I realized something profound. The real battle wasn't between races. The real battle was between truth and lies. The lies that told us we were different. The lies that told us we had to fight. The lies that told us we were victims, that we were guilty, that we couldn't forgive, that we couldn't move forward. But Jesus had come to set us free from all of that. His message was simple. Love one another as I have loved you. John 13:34. And while I was still immersed in the truth of the lies the enemy had sown, Jesus continued to expand my understanding of how these people had lost their true identity. Jesus showed me how many people were lost, not physically, but spiritually. Their identity had been stolen. It wasn't that they didn't exist or weren't real. It was that they didn't know who they were. I watched people just like you and me, drifting through life, unaware of the lies that had been planted in their hearts. Their identities had been shaped by the world around them, by societal expectations, by broken families, by the narratives they were taught to believe. They didn't know themselves. They didn't know what they stood for, who they were meant to be, or why they were on this earth. They were living lives that were empty, unfulfilled, and false. But they didn't know it. They had been told they were supposed to be a certain way, told by parents, teachers, social media, and the media at large. They were taught what to believe about themselves and the world around them, and in doing so, they lost their sense of self. I saw young people striving for perfection, yet constantly feeling incomplete. They wore masks to fit in, to meet expectations, only to feel more lost inside. I saw broken families, parents and children caught in cycles of pain and confusion, their relationships fractured by emotional wounds. I saw children growing up in households where they were taught not by love, but by the weight of their parents' own struggles and unmet expectations. The message they received was simple. Who you are doesn't matter as much as what others think of you. And I saw those who tried to find a place of belonging, only to be shaped by lies and deceit, told that their worth came from things that could never fill them. They tried to fill the hole in their hearts with material things, achievement, or fame, all the while growing emptier with every success, every like, every share. But none of it brought them peace. None of it gave them the fulfillment they were looking for. But Jesus also showed me something else. The warriors. He showed me those who had not lost their identity. He showed me those who knew the truth, who stood firm in the face of all the lies. Teachers, pastors, parents, students. These were the people who fought back against the enemy's manipulation. They didn't carry swords or shields, but they carried truth. And that truth, Jesus showed me, was more powerful than any weapon. These warriors were a beacon of light in a world full of darkness. They stood tall, refusing to be swayed by the lies that others believed. They held on to their identity, not because it was easy, but because they knew who they were. They were fighting a battle that wasn't fought in the physical world, but in the spiritual realm. They were equipped with the truth that came from Jesus himself. "These are my warriors," Jesus said, his voice full of pride and strength. "They are not afraid to stand for what is right, even when it costs them everything. They speak my truth, they live my truth, and they carry my love wherever they go." I saw teachers who refused to conform to the educational system that was more focused on testing than on building character. They stood firm, teaching their students not just the facts, but the truth. They spoke about the value of integrity, of courage, and of kindness. These teachers weren't just teaching lessons from textbooks. They were teaching lessons for life, lessons that would shape the hearts of young people for generations to come. And they didn't do it for recognition. They didn't do it for money. They did it because they knew who they were, and they knew their purpose. Then I saw the pastors, men and women of God who had not bowed to the pressures of society, who didn't care about popularity or social standing. They stood up and preached the word of God, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. They spoke of love, redemption, and salvation. They didn't water down the gospel for comfort. They preached it with boldness and grace, knowing that their identity came not from the approval of people, but from the approval of God. I saw parents who chose to love their children with the same love God had shown them. They weren't perfect, but they didn't need to be. They chose to show up for their children, to guide them, to love them through their mistakes and triumphs. They didn't demand perfection, but they taught their children what it meant to be real, to be authentic, to be loved. And then there were the students, the ones who had heard the truth and believed it. They weren't swayed by the distractions of social media, the pressures of their peers, or the narrative that was being forced on them. They stood for truth in a world that was trying to sell them lies. They carried the flame of hope, and they shared it wherever they went. Jesus showed me that truth was the only thing that could free us from the lies that had been woven into the very fabric of our society. The enemy wanted to distort the truth about who we were, about who we are meant to be, and about why we exist. But truth, God's truth, could not be broken. It was the foundation of everything. It was the key to unlocking our true identity. "You are not what the world tells you that you are," Jesus said. "You are not defined by your past, by your mistakes, or by the lies that have been told to you. You are my creation. You are my child. You are worthy of love, worthy of grace, and worthy of truth." In that moment, I felt the weight of those words sink into my soul. I realized that truth wasn't just a set of facts. It was a person. It was Jesus, He was the way, the truth, and the life. And as long as I had him, I could never lose my identity. He had already given me everything I needed to know who I was. While I witnessed the mighty warriors protecting the real, I also saw another scenario where people are slowly losing their freedom and self-awareness as they fail to realize the hidden dangers in the technological advancements they are accepting. I was shown a future, a world where people were lining up. At first, it didn't make sense to me. These people weren't waiting for food, for resources, or even for anything particularly special. They were waiting for implants. I saw them standing patiently, eagerly, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. These implants were small, almost imperceptible devices, but they weren't just for medical purposes or for tracking health. They were about control, a method of merging the human body with technology. People had been led to believe that these implants would help them in ways they could never have imagined, that they would make their lives easier, more connected, and better than ever before. I watched as people, full of excitement, eagerly accepted this new technology, trusting that it would solve the problems they faced. There was no hesitation, no fear, just a longing for something better. The leaders, the influencers, the tech giants, those in power, had convinced them that this was the future, the key to a new world, a better world. But as I watched, something about it felt deeply wrong. This wasn't progress. This was manipulation. Then, in a moment of clarity, Jesus appeared beside me. His presence was overwhelming, full of grace and wisdom. I looked at him, my heart full of questions. Why were people doing this? Why were they accepting something that seemed so invasive, so dangerous? With compassion in his eyes, he spoke. What you are seeing is not the mark of the beast, but it is the first step toward it, he said. This is not yet the end, but the beginning. The world is being set up for a greater deception, one that will slowly become so ingrained in people's lives that they will not see it coming until it is too late. I could feel the gravity of his words sinking into my soul. This wasn't just technology. This was control. This wasn't about creating a better life for humanity. It was about enslaving it, piece by piece, until freedom became a distant memory. He continued, explaining how this implantation wasn't a one-time event. It was the start of something far more insidious. It was a system designed to take control of every aspect of a person's life, from their thoughts to their actions. It started with the promise of convenience, of progress, and of a world made better through technology. But as people accepted it, they would be gradually stripped of their freedom. At first, it would feel like an advantage, like something they couldn't live without. But over time, the convenience would turn into necessity, and the necessity would become mandatory. Eventually, there would be no choice but to comply. The idea of life without these implants, without this system, would seem impossible, as though it were a step backward. The world would begin to worship this convenience, to rely on it as if it were the answer to every problem humanity had faced. People will line up, Jesus said, his voice filled with sorrow, because they will believe that this is the way to salvation, to safety, to a new world. They will think that it will make them better, but it will enslave them. As I listened, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of fear. Fear for what was coming. Fear for the people who would never see it for what it was. This wasn't just about an implant or a microchip. It was about the slow erosion of human freedom, the gradual surrender of the soul to a system of control. It was the enemy's plan in motion, a carefully orchestrated scheme designed to take people's focus away from truth and freedom and instead substitute it with false promises of security and comfort. It will start small, Jesus explained. It will start with promises of ease, convenience, and a better life. But the enemy's goal is not just to control your purchases or your bank account. His goal is to control your very soul, your thoughts, your decisions. I could see it in my mind's eye. The gradual steps, the little changes that would seem harmless at first. People would be told that these implants were needed to access basic services. It would begin with something simple. like being able to pay for things without cards or cash. It would be convenient, efficient. It would seem like the next logical step in human progress. Then, it would be tied to social systems, perhaps healthcare or education. People would embrace it, even demand it, without realizing that they were giving up their autonomy. As the years passed, those who resisted would be labeled as outcasts, difficult, or even dangerous. Slowly, those who refused to comply would be left behind, isolated from the rest of society. The implant would not just be about convenience anymore, it would become necessary for participation in the world. Without it, people would be cut off from society itself. At this point, I began to understand what Jesus was trying to tell me. This implant, this technology, wasn't just a tool. It was a deception. It promised freedom but delivered slavery. It promised connection but led to isolation. People would be given the illusion of choice, the illusion of control, but in reality, they would be handing over their freedom piece by piece without even knowing it. The enemy is clever, Jesus said. He will never force people into this. He will lead them step by step until they believe they have no choice but to accept what he offers. At first, it will seem like a gift, a great advancement, but in time, it will be a curse. I felt the weight of his words. The more I thought about it, the more it became clear that this was not just about the technology itself. It was about the mindset that would come with it. The willingness to accept control in exchange for comfort, to trust the systems that had been created, to believe that the world was improving even as it was slowly being bound in chains. And as I began to realize the truth behind what I was witnessing, a sense of awakening rose within me. As if another path, a dangerous but necessary one, was emerging. As I stood there, looking into his eyes, the truth of what he was showing me began to sink in. The world was being deceived. Jesus didn't just tell me to stay awake. He told me how to stay awake. Pray, he said. Pray for wisdom. Pray for discernment. Pray for the strength to follow me no matter what the world tells you. My sheep know my voice and they will not follow a stranger. The more you pray, the more you will recognize the lies, the more you will see through the enemy's schemes. And when you walk in truth, you are protected. That word, protection, stood out to me. Because let's face it, this isn't going to be easy. The world isn't going to just roll over and let us be awake. The enemy is going to do everything in his power to blind us, to keep us from seeing the truth. He will make us doubt, make us question, make us feel like we're crazy for believing what Jesus says. But prayer is our weapon. It's our shield, our way of staying in tune with God's will. When we pray, we align ourselves with truth, and that alignment will protect us from the waves of deception that are flooding the world. I saw, in my vision, how people who were awake and prayed were shielded from the enemy's lies. They didn't just stand back and hope for the best. They were actively fighting against the lies that were being spread. And it wasn't about force or violence. It was about truth, about staying grounded in the Word of God, and about sharing that truth with others. As I stood there, watching all these people walking blindly into deception, I felt an overwhelming sense of urgency. This wasn't something that could wait. The time to act was now. Jesus urged me to share what I had seen, to tell others about the danger that was coming before it was too late. Because there's a day coming when it will be harder to wake up, when the world will be so entrenched in lies, so deeply in the grip of the enemy, that even the most well-meaning people will struggle to break free. He said, "Tell them, Jessica. Tell them to stay awake. Tell them to choose truth now, before they are deceived beyond measure. The world will call them crazy, will call them foolish, but I have called them my own. I have equipped them with truth, with discernment, and with the power of prayer. Those who stay awake will not be deceived. They will know the truth and be free." I could feel his heart in those words. He wasn't just warning me. He was pleading with me. And it wasn't just for me. It was for you too. We cannot afford to be complacent. We cannot afford to let the world lull us into sleep. The stakes are too high. When I realized the need to awaken, I could not have imagined that I myself would become a living witness to what he had warned me about. The accident I encountered brought me to a painful trial, but at the same time opened my eyes to the truth that he had shown me before. I woke up in the hospital, my body battered and broken, yet somehow I was still alive. Doctors had told my family that the injuries I sustained were so severe that I shouldn't have survived. But somehow, by a miracle, I was still breathing. I couldn't quite understand it at first. My body was in so much pain, but my spirit was alive. More alive than I had ever felt before. The memory of what I had seen, the messages I received, all seemed so clear in my mind, but as I tried to speak about it, I found that no one around me could fully understand. It was a struggle. Telling people about my experience, about the divine revelation, about what Jesus had shown me. To some, it sounded like nothing more than a hallucination, a vivid dream caused by trauma. They dismissed it as a result of my accident, something my brain had conjured up to cope with the shock. I couldn't blame them for doubting. After all, it was hard to put into words something so profound, so life-altering, something that felt like it came from another world entirely. But I knew the truth. What I had seen, what I had been told, was real. However, despite the skepticism, there were a few, just a few, who listened and truly heard me. They sensed that something was shifting in the world. Something was wrong, but they couldn't put their finger on it. My words seemed to resonate with them, though they couldn't completely grasp the enormity of the warning. Still, they heard me, and I could see the unease in their eyes. They too felt that something was coming, something we weren't ready for, but they didn't know what. I emphasized one key thing: deception. It will not appear as a threat at first, I told them. At first, it will seem helpful, even logical. It will make sense, and you'll feel that it's just a minor inconvenience. But it will slowly take over, gradually becoming forced, a necessity that you can't escape. This was the pattern. I had seen it with my own eyes. People would be tricked into thinking the changes were for their benefit, only to realize too late that they had lost control over their lives. The enemy doesn't just take what's given. It paves the way, making people believe they are acting freely, when in reality, they are being controlled. As I shared my experience, I felt the urgency in my heart to warn people. The world is changing, and it's not changing for the better. So I concluded with this final message, the message that burned in my soul. Prepare yourselves. Strengthen your faith. Pray. Stay vigilant. Jesus had reassured me. He had promised me that his people would be protected, but only if they stayed awake to the truth. Only if they continued to seek him, to pray, and to discern the lies that were being fed to them. The protection he offered wasn't automatic. It required us to remain alert, to stay rooted in the truth and not be swept away by the lies of the world. This wasn't just about physical survival. It was about spiritual survival. So I urge you now, as I urge those around me, stay awake. The world may look fine on the surface, but underneath things are shifting. The time to strengthen your faith, to pray, and to seek the truth is now, before it's too late. As I reflect on everything I've seen, I can't shake the urgency in my heart. The truth is out there, and the enemy is doing everything in his power to keep it hidden. But we can't afford to stay silent. We can't afford to stay asleep. I know what I've experienced was real, what Jesus revealed to me, what I saw in that vision. It wasn't just a warning for me. It's for all of us. If you're hearing this, it's because you're being called to wake up and stand firm. The deception is all around us, but we can still choose truth. We can still choose to follow Jesus, to walk in the light, and to protect our hearts from the lies of this world. But it's not going to be easy. That's why I'm asking you. No, urging you to share this message. Like this post. Comment your thoughts below and share this with your friends, your family, and anyone you can reach. The more people who hear the truth, the more lives can be saved from the deception that's creeping in. Hit that subscribe button and join me as we continue to seek the truth, to strengthen our faith, and to prepare for what's coming. Jesus promised that his people would be protected, but only if we stay awake and stay vigilant. I believe God is about to bless those who are faithful and true. Now is the time to stand up, to take action, and to follow the path he's set before us. Don't wait. Take a step today. Share this message because I truly believe that those who do will receive his protection, his guidance, and his blessings. Stay awake. Stay strong. Stay faithful. And remember, the truth will always set you free.